I'm going to turn it over to our speakers for the day. We have Donikea Austin and Krysia Orlowski from the Adoption Network Cleveland, and they're going to speak today about transracial adoptions.
My name is Donikea Austin. I'm the program manager at Adoption Network Cleveland, where we provide supports for adoptive, foster, and kinship care families. We have support groups, one-on-one supports, education supports, among other things. And then I'm going to let Krysia introduce herself.
Hi, I am Krysia Orlowski. I am the parent coordinator for the Adoption Network Cleveland Weaving Cultures Family Group. I am also an adoptive parent of a multicultural family, and I grew up in a family that was also multicultural. I have 2 siblings who were adopted.
Okay, and today we're going to talk about the 5 things transracial families need to know to thrive, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. These are just a couple of things that Krysia and I came up with when we were thinking about the topic. So the first one is love is not enough. We know that children, especially children of adoption and children who are living in multicultural homes, transracial families, they obviously need our love and affection and attention, but beyond that, they require a little more than some other children in your home. So some of the things we're going to talk about with that is the myth of color blindness. And we've all heard this term colorblind or I don't see color. What we really want to note is when people say that, what they're really saying is they see a difference in you and they're choosing not to acknowledge an important part of you. It would be like saying, I know you're Jewish, but I really don't see religion. When we say it that way, it sounds foolish. So we can't really take a person at face value without acknowledging who they are and their culture and life experiences. And we know that because your children have different backgrounds, their life experiences may not be the same as yours. And we have to also acknowledge that. We also need to check our assumptions about white privilege. And we have a short video here from Pact Adopt from Beth Hall. And Pact Adopt serves as a nonprofit that serves adoptees of color and their families. So we're going to show that video right now about white privilege and interracial adoption.
White privilege is something we use to describe unearned benefits that people who are white get simply because they're white. For many of us that are white, we don't notice white privilege. What does white privilege look like? It looks like when I walk into a store or a restaurant, I expect to be treated with respect, and generally I am. I expect to be given the best available table, and generally I am. I expect to go to the mall and not be harassed or followed in a store if I'm just browsing and not buying, as if I might be stealing something. That's not always true for people of color. Therefore, white privilege. It's important to think about white privilege as a white parent parenting a child of color, because fundamentally, my experience of life is different than my children's. And that has everything to do with how I'm going to be a good parent to them. If I don't get that first important piece, I'm going to have trouble understanding what's happening to them, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and how they might respond to it. It allows me to become their ally if I understand what it is and name it. Just like we do with kids, we have to name things for ourselves too.
Okay. So that was, again, Beth Haw, and she's the co-founder of PACT. So some other things we need to think about when we're thinking about serving our kids and supporting them beyond just loving them is, are we providing enriching cultural and community experiences for for children in transracial families? It has to go beyond acknowledging that they are from a different culture. It has to be a lived experience. So thinking about how you're celebrating and showing them elements of their culture throughout the day, the week, the month. And there's some questions that we have added to most of our slides for this presentation, just some questions to ask yourself, some food for thought to help you kind of go deeper on these topics. How can I help my child understand the world and their place in it? How do I provide my child with enriching cultural experiences? How do I engage with my child's culture and community? And are there changes I need to make for the sake of my child?
So slide number 2, your kids are different. Going back to slide number 1, we talked about being colorblind. As a people, we don't like to talk about differences. We don't want to point out people's differences. But when we do that, we are really denying the fact that your kids are different, and they know they're different. They know they don't look like you. And when you adopt a child of another race or culture, it's not only the child who is different, it's your whole family becomes a different family. Some people are comfortable with difference. To them, difference is interesting, wonderful, special, and other people are not. And you need to be prepared to face a lot of comments and criticisms and questions, and often in front of your children, thinking about how do you respond to that, especially when your child is present, and in a way that uplifts your child and celebrates them. When we understand differences, we uphold each other's individual identities. When we do, so in other words, we celebrate our diversity, we uphold each other. This also teaches empathy. When we teach our children to live in their authentic individual identity, we are also teaching them to understand the very rich cultural world that we live in. So what does it mean to support your children living authentically in our identity? That means cultural fluency. Very often when we adopt a child of another race or culture, you know, we're bent on, you know, we got to learn how to do their hair, and we're going to buy the right books, and we're going to start watching the right TV shows with our children. But that's not enough. They need more than that. They need more than just reading a book or attending that art festival. They need immersion. They need cultural immersion. They need to be a part of their community. They need to be a part of their culture. That means friendships. That means mentors. That means really fully supporting your child living and authentically in their racial identity. And that also means like taking a really good, long, hard look at yourself. What kind of books do you read? What kind of movies are you watching? Do your children see you engaging in their culture without them? It has to be part of this is part of your family culture now too. It's not just their culture. You need to learn to be okay being uncomfortable, and understanding that you're not going to be looked at the same way anymore. You also won't be comfortable with what your child is experiencing out there. Their experience will be different than yours because of the fact that they are of a different culture or a different skin color. And you can be empathetic to what they're going through, but at the end of the day, you haven't experienced that yourself. So it is going to be extremely important for your child to have access to people who understands what it feels like, and to them to see you advocating on their behalf for what they're going through. So some questions to ask yourself: is my child's culture an integrated part of how we function as a family? And if not, how will you celebrate their culture? Do I encourage my child to love what makes them different? And am I the kind of person who likes to sit in the shadows, or am I able to step forward and advocate?
Our third slide talks about representation, and representation matters. Racial and or cultural mirrors for your child and for your child to have in their daily life is very important. Growing up, it is really important for your children to be able to see themselves in other people so that they know that they can be that thing. So when your child's teacher looks like them, or your child's doctor looks like them, it really helps with self-esteem. It helps drive home the point for them that they could also become those things, because they have those mirrors in real life. Even if they don't exactly match or look exactly like your child, part of that is just knowing that people from their background and their culture can do and be more than they could ever imagine to be. Racial and or cultural experiences for you. Make your child's race/culture part of your experience. So again, we're talking about on a day-to-day basis, what are you doing to engage in that culture? And that could be, you know, reading books, that could be listening to podcasts, that could be, if you're an art collector, do you have art from your child's cultural background? And it really has to be beyond doing it for your child. You have to do it for yourself to be a part of their culture, to show them that you stand beside them, and have some sort of understanding about where they come from. There's a researcher named J. Ron Kim, and she's a professor and researcher and a transracial adoptee. And one of the quotes from a presentation I went to from her was, "The people in our lives need to care about our communities of origin and not just adoptees as individuals. So while it is important to care about your child and their experiences, you also need to show that you care about their culture, their community, and where they come from, because that matters more for them. So there's some questions that you need to ask yourself regarding this topic as well. Am I ever the only person? Are you ever the only person of your race in the room? What books do you read? TV shows do you watch, or music do you listen to? What cultural icons do you uphold? We talked about Taylor Swift, Taylor Swift versus Cardi B. They are talking about the same thing, but for some people, they one is demonized while one is upheld, and I think we kind of know which one is which. And think about what that looks like when you're talking to your children. If you have biases that you haven't worked through or thought about, what podcast or artwork hangs in your home? Does your child have role models that looks like them? Teachers, school staff, doctors, extracurricular activities? And will your child see themselves in your family, friends, church, or community?
Slide number 4, relationship surprises. This is a hard one to talk about because this involves your family, your friends, your community, your church. You may think you know yourself, you may think you know your family members very well, but you have to be prepared for the people in your life to disappoint you. And you need to be prepared for the fact that you may disappoint yourself in this journey as well. It is very important to examine your beliefs and attitudes about race and ethnicity when you're adopting a child of another race or culture. So try to think of, have you yourself made any assumptions about people because of their race or culture? Try to think of your family members and friends who have made assumptions about people because of their race or culture. And think about how are you going to respond to people, you know, and it's not just strangers, which is much easier to respond to a stranger on the street than your own family member and your friend or people in your church. And you have to be able to respond in a way that's going to help your child feel good about themselves, because your child is going to be witnessing a lot of this. Are you prepared to put your child first in all scenarios? A great example would be, you know, Thanksgiving with that racist uncle. You know, we all have that family member who was, you know, at best culturally insensitive or flat out racist at worst. What is it like for your child to be in the presence of that person? Are you prepared to educate your family and your friends? And if they're not on board, are you prepared to put your child first and cut out family and friends who can't respond appropriately? It is a cold, sad, hard fact that sometimes we are forced to make these kinds of decisions. So some questions to ask yourself. Is my child the first person of this race and or culture in my intimate life? How does my extended family view and talk about my child's cultural community? How have I prepared my extended family for our child? And am I prepared to put my child first in all situations? And am I prepared to let go of family or friends? Right, next slide. So slide number 5 brings us back to the relationship between parent and child, and communication is key. Talking to your child early and often about adoption. You know, it always feels awkward when especially if you're adopting an infant, or when you know you're told, oh, you got to talk to your baby. It's like, baby's not talking back. But you're going to, if you talk early and often about adoption, even before your child is really fully able to absorb it or respond, by the time your child is old enough to talk about things, it's become a natural part of your everyday conversation. So talking with your child early and often about adoption, these conversations don't have to be heavy. They can be just keep it matter of fact. This is their story. This is just the facts. Talking often and early with your child about race and ethnicity. We do know that people believe sometimes that children are too young to understand or see these differences, but we know that there are studies out there that demonstrate children know from a very, very early age, babyhood, are recognizing and categorizing the world around them, and that includes people, and that includes skin color. So talking with your child about race and ethnicity and upholding those cultural differences from the beginning makes it a part of a natural experience in their upbringing. And so you can do all of these things. You can read the right books and watch the right movies and immerse yourself in your child's culture and talk about it all the time. And you may even have an open adoption where you're in close contact with your child's family of origin and their extended community from their beginning. You may come, there may be times your child doesn't want to talk about this stuff. They don't want to talk about race. They're not going to want to talk about adoption. Just follow your child's lead. If you've done the first 2 steps on this slide, you have created an open and easy communication pathway with your child. And so when they don't want to talk about it, you can respect that, but you've laid the foundation for them to know that you are open and able to have those conversations when they are ready to have them. And this final point, which is not actually on the slide, would be sometimes your child may not want to talk to you, but making sure that they have spaces and people that they can talk to is also going to be important. So having safe spaces and resources and people for that they can talk to outside of yourself. Okay. So some questions to ask yourself. How can I learn about and understand racism? This is a key one. Being a white parent of a transracial adoptee means that every single day you need to be thinking about that and learning and growing and understanding. Second question, do I talk often and positively of my child's cultural heritage and community? Third question, does my child have safe spaces, people they can turn to talk to?
So we have a couple of resources here for anyone who is a part of a transracial family or is interested in learning more. One of the resources is Transracial Journeys, and they are an organization that focuses on transracial adoption and families. Right, the leader is an adult adoptee who was a transracial adoptee herself, and she has a podcast and tons of information and resources. They have groups and other supports for parents and adult adoptees as well. And then there's Pact Adopt, which is another resource for adoptees of color and their families. There is Adoption Network Cleveland, which is us, and we have a transracial family group and support. So if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to Adoption Network Cleveland or one of the resource managers at CFK, and they can direct you to us. There's also the Child Mind Institute, and they have lots of resources beyond just adoption, but resources for children, for families with children that are evidence-based and led. A lot of the resources are provided by psychiatrists. There is Culture Camp, which there are a few different camps for transracial families, but Culture Camp has specific camp dates for various cultures. So there are camps for Korean adoptees, there are camps for Caribbean adoptees, Russian adoptees. So if you have any sort of transracial adoption, you can probably find yourself in any of the culture camps, as well as some of the other camps for transracial families. And there's the Child Information Gateway, where again, you can find anything on any sort of parenting, any child issues, but they also have one on raising culturally diverse and racially diverse families. There is another book that Krysia recommended, and I haven't gotten a chance to read it, but it is called In Their Voices, Black Americans on Transracial Adoption by Rhonda M. Rudra. I hope I said that right. And then we just have some people to know, some of the movers and shakers, some of the names you'll hear when you talk about transracial adoption. There's Angela Tucker, and she is the director of post-adoption services at Amara. She's also a filmmaker and a speaker and a transracial adoptee. So she's done a documentary about her reconnecting with her birth family while still being in connection with her adoptive family and how that's going. April Dinwoody is the executive director at Transracial Journey. She's a podcaster, speaker, and a transracial adoptee. Nicole Chung is the author of a book called All You Could Ever Know, and she is a transracial adoptee as well. Kim Stevens, the program manager at NACAC, which is the North American Council of Adoptable Children, and she's a transracial parent. Jae-Ren Kim is PhD, is an assistant professor at the University of Washington, Tacoma, and she's a transracial adoptee, and she also has a blog for transracial adoptees.
Great. Thank you so much to Donikea Austin and Krysia Orlowski from Adoption Network Cleveland for their wonderful presentation on transracial adoption.